In the last presentation, I talked about how it's been theorized that faces are processed in a much more holistic way than other objects, which tend to be processed on the basis of their individual features. So what does that tell us about Photofits? Well, traditional Photofit systems are very much focused on getting people to analyze faces feature by feature. That is, the eyewitness sits down with a big library of different features to build up a picture of the person that they saw. You choose a nose that fits, then you choose a mouth that fits, and so on. Here are some examples of Photofits created in research on the topic. Even when the target face is actually in view, we tend to get very poor likenesses. Of course, in a real crime, it's likely to be even worse because the witness will be doing it from memory, possibly a quite flaky memory. So why does this approach seem to work so poorly? Maybe it's because it assumes that people recognize people feature by feature, when the research indicates that that's exactly what they don't do. That is, when you see someone in the street, you don't look at their nose, then their eyes, then their mouth to see if it's someone you know. You look at the whole face all at once. That is, traditional Photofits fail because, as revealed by psychological research, they make a fundamentally wrong assumption about how people recognize faces. So, what can we do about this? Well, in recent years, psychologists have attempted to come up with alternative Photofit techniques that don't rely on this feature-by-feature approach, and instead tap into cognitive psychology findings about face recognition and memory. One example of such a technique is known as EvoFit, which is developed by Charlie Froud of the University of Central Lancashire, Peter Hancock of the University of Stirling, and Vicky Bruce at Newcastle University. The eyewitness chooses from an array of 72 random faces the 6 that are most similar to the face that they've seen. The software integrates the facial features of the 6 chosen faces to produce 72 new composite faces, and the witness chooses the 6 most similar faces from this new array. After just 3 such iterations, the team found that people could accurately identify the face in the resulting composite around 25% of the time, while feature-based Photofits only resulted in correct identification around 5% of the time. So that is, EvoFit produced 5 times the accuracy rate of the feature-based Photofit. So, the key thing about this system is that it doesn't rely on an eyewitness having to decompose a face into its individual features. Every judgment they make is on the whole face. Another advantage is that the system doesn't rely on the eyewitness having to verbally describe the face, such as they would have to do with other methods of facial reconstruction, such as using a sketch artist. They only have to recognize it. Another thing that EvoFit does is to deliberately blur what they call external features. So these are the hair, the ears and the neck, in order to draw people's attention to what they call the internal features, such as the eyes, eyebrows, nose and mouth. This is because the internal features are much more important to identification, and the external features can distract from these. Finally, they also use sliding scales to allow the eyewitness to manipulate the image of the face. But crucially, these scales all operate at the holistic level. That is, they adjust things that affect the whole face, not just bits of it. Examples might include age, health, weight, honesty, and masculinity. So the idea is that if you can produce the face of a suspect using these techniques, you'll end up with a better likeness of the suspect. Of course, like everything, there are some caveats to bear in mind when we're talking about the efficacy of EvoFit. First, much of the research into EvoFit has been carried out quite naturally by the people who created it, and so it would be good to have more research by some more independent researchers. It's also worth noting that not every single study found a clear advantage of EvoFit over more traditional feature-based photofit techniques, though these studies seem to be the exception rather than the norm. There's some variation in outcomes depending on the details of how the recognition task is performed and measured. It's also worth remembering that, as mentioned earlier, the likenesses of criminals can also be created by using sketch artists, where they tend to use a holistic approach to recreating the face. Though, as previously noted, this approach does require eyewitnesses to verbally describe the suspect. I should mention that in the interests of balance, given that EvoFit is a commercial product, there are other products such as EvoFit 5, which are based on similar principles. So, overall, we have a nice example of a situation where psychologists have applied the findings from basic psychological research on face recognition to come up with a tool that appears to do its job. In this case, generating a better likeness of a suspect, better than previous tools that ignored psychological research. Next, we'll look at research into one of the main methods of getting eyewitnesses to identify a suspect, namely the lineup.